Let's review some methodologies, some methods of evangelism that we've seen through looking at various parts of the New Testament and the Bible, how or why evangelism happens. Now we're looking at how it happens. So there's many ways to do it. We're just going to look at this John Rothera's review article here. What's best and what's worst? And this article briefly analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of various evangelism methods. What's the best method? Of course, the main point here is that whatever is appropriate, your task is to decide what works in the particular context of where you are, to whom you're speaking. It's just like a teacher coming to a class. You have to decide what is appropriate, what is age appropriate for the person that you're teaching. So that governs the language that you'll use and the style that you adopt. So the multiple evangelism methods people and churches use to share Jesus with others, but each one has those strengths and weaknesses. All right, what's most comfortable to you? What suits your personality the best? So here we go, using this article as our starting point for your thought processes. Lifestyle evangelism, that can be understood in one of two ways. Live right and people will see the gospel. Others may know that he lives because they see something in you. And the corollary of that is that they will ask questions. They will ask you, why do you do certain things? Why do you live in a certain way? Why do you speak in a certain way? Okay, the strengths of that is that it encourages you to keep your game clean, to evaluate yourself, to be consistent, to not be a hypocrite. And it helps you to live your life in sync with the gospel, to live not just appropriately, but intentionally, thinking about how the way that you live impacts the people who are around you. Okay, well, this sort of thing is fair enough, isn't it? There are weaknesses, though. It's not really biblical evangelism. It's only a means to possible evangelism. And it is rather passive. And it does make it possible for you to just sink into doing absolutely nothing and waiting for people to come to you. So is that really evangelism? Is that really disciple-making enterprise? In the final analysis, lifestyle evangelism is best summed up in a phrase I've heard many times: my life is my witness. But the statement falls apart when you consider what it is to be a witness. Acts 1, verse 8, you will be my witnesses here and there and everywhere. You'll be my witnesses. You'll tell the truth. You'll proclaim something. Well, and this is best illustrated by the story here, which is going to share. The court's in session. The prosecutor calls his witness. She takes the stand. The jury awaits her testimony. The lawyer asked the woman, did you witness the events in question? Yes, I did. Please tell the jury what you saw. The witness sits there smiling, unsure if she heard him. The prosecutor repeats, ma'am, will you please just tell the jury what you saw? I did, she says, smiling. No, you didn't. Tell the jury your testimony. She continues smiling. The prosecutor is impatient, asks the judge to order the witness to answer the question. Ma'am, you'll tell the jury what you saw. You will say what you witnessed. Your Honor, my life is my witness. So in the story, the woman believed that her life served as a witness, but she never shared her experiences. She did not serve as a witness for the prosecution, but only as a courtroom seat warmer. And in many ways, in the same sense, many Christians warm the church pews, and though instructed to be witnesses, silently sit there expecting their lives to be their witness. People may misconstrue your life. They may not understand. They might put it down to another a form of medication. So they might not know why you act in a certain way. They might not. They almost certainly will not. make the same assumptions that you're making about yourself. Living is not evangelizing. Lifestyle is not evangelism. Proclaiming the gospel is evangelism. And one's life either affirms or detracts from the credibility of our testimony. So this is important. It's crucial. Lifestyle is crucial, but it's not evangelism. Okay. Servant evangelism or service evangelism. And this is popularized by the Conspiracy of Kindness and the Alvin Reed's servanthood evangelism. And the idea is that you just do kind things. You just do kind things or acts of service, random acts of random kindness, etc. And the strength is that it emphasizes showing love as a way to open doors to evangelism. It's very simple. It's very affordable to implement. You just do something nice for people. And you can do it any time. And the implication is that it creates opportunities to share the gospel. Random acts of kindness. Just be kind. Just do stuff. The weakness is people can improperly believe the service to be evangelism. And serving may be emphasized while evangelism is de-emphasized. Limited training on personal evangelism. And though doable by individuals, it seems more apropos for group outreach. What do you think? What do you think? Again, there's absolutely nothing wrong and everything right about being kind. Kindness is really seriously underrated. Kindness changes the world. Kindness is king. It's wonderful. And I'm sure that everybody who's come to Christ or been drawn into a church fellowship has done so as a direct result because someone somewhere was kind to them. But it's not evangelism. I'm a fan of servant evangelism, especially for churches and small groups and youth groups. It doesn't require a large budget. It can be done with ease, can be exciting, can be fun, and has an opportunity to open the doors to the gospel. The world accuses Christians of preaching love and not showing love. Evangelists critique Christians for showing love and not preaching love. Servanthood evangelism done properly shows love and preaches love, addressing both concerns. So it's something, it's a stage nearer, isn't it? But it's still providing the opportunity for the conversation and not the conversation itself. And I think that's a very, very important distinction to make. In third place, event evangelism. And this, now we come much more to what is popularly thought of as evangelism. It's a popular method among churches and groups, revival services, holiday clubs, vacation Bible schools, Halloween alternatives and things, Christmas events, everything, crusades, as they used to be called so much. An outreach event is held, the public is invited, and ideally the gospel is shared, maybe by an expert or practitioner, maybe a famous person. The gospel shared with those who attend. So the strengths of event evangelism, it creates and builds on public interests, and it can generate name identification for the church or the group. And large crowds increases potential evangelistic encounters. And you have to pause and think of event evangelism in church history. Think in terms of the Billy Graham crusades from the 50s onwards. Think today, Reinhard Bonnke and the massive events, massive numbers of people coming to an event and then raising their hand or coming to the front or being connected to a local church. You can see the strengths. You can see that the weakness, it can often build a name identification for the church or group and very little for the gospel. It can be very expensive, very much beyond what a local church might be able to really successfully accomplish. And attendees are often primarily members of the sponsoring church or other community churches, especially with revival services or gospel concerts, similar events. And most Christians do not have to evangelize, or they choose not to evangelize. So their evangelism becomes detached from that kindness, detached from that lifestyle that we said are really important. And it just becomes getting someone to a meeting. So evangelism becomes an event rather than a regular daily activity. It's like we want to be critical of everything and also appreciative of everything. It's right, isn't it? Critical of everything, but constructively critical. And the task here is to weigh up all these things and to see how they work, but notice how they don't work. In the final analysis, evangelistic events are a wonderful idea if they are evangelistic. If they're truly evangelistic, then they are promoting the gospel and not promoting the church. And that means the event promotion should focus on reaching the community rather than on reaching other churches. And the sponsoring church should be really careful that the gospel is clearly presented in every way possible. And it is the gospel and not my tribe's outreach, in distinction to your tribe's outreach. You might even see yourself in competition against another local church. And how can that be anything to do with New Testament evangelism? Events are not a substitute for church-wide personal evangelism strategy. Okay, let's move on and think of neighborhood evangelism or door-to-door evangelism. Neighborhood evangelism might include door-to-door evangelism, but just think about those things together. Door knocking, okay? And we think immediately of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. That's what many think of when they think of door-to-door evangelism, going house to house, sharing the gospel with those who answer on the door itself. And how can you say that that is no longer appropriate or something? One weakness immediately might be you're associated with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and you don't want to. You want to be distinguished from them. So by doing the same thing that they do, it becomes problematic. You might think of it becoming a regular church activity. In the States, many Southern Baptist churches do this sort of door-to-door, a weekday evening. It's part of the common duty. Yeah, let's use the word duty of the local church. Okay, the strengths are it's great for generating personal contact with new visitors. I've seen this at first hand. You can, if you meet someone in a point of need, you can make an immediate contact, an immediately fruitful contact. If somebody is in a need right there and right then, they may well be open to prayer. They may well be open to receiving your care and your love. And it's to go door to door is easily scheduled. It's inexpensive. And if there's 50 people in your church and 20 of them go on different days on different streets, you can cover a lot of territory really, really well. It's a great method for low-cost event promotion. Will you come to this service in the building down the street? And it's common practice among many churches, and it's easy to implement. On the other hand, participation is generally very low. Why is that? Well, because of our tendency. Well, I guess you have to start your critique by thinking how you feel when somebody knocks at your door and how you respond to, if you're watching TV or eating a meal and there's a knock at the door, you might not be completely positive. You might not want to share your needs with somebody else. You might not want to stop everything and have a conversation about the deeper things in life. And so if you feel like that, you have to turn that around and think that that's how people receive you. And you will be putting yourself, as I said, on a par, not just with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, but also with double glazing salesmen, commission sales, and with people and scam artists and thieves who are casing the joint. So you're coming into a tricky area. So these things have to be considered very carefully. If you go to someone's door, you need to really know that you're led by the Holy Spirit and you know what you're doing, and you're really consciously living the gospel and prepared to share it with the people the other side of that door. So for these reasons, participation in this kind of event is generally very low. It generally comes down to what, 20 out of 50? No, 3 out of 50. Okay. And our lifestyle, our culture in the West is very different to how it used to be. And urbanization, gated communities, technological advances reduce access in many communities. Many times people will just not answer the door. And evangelistic effectiveness because of this is generally very low. And again, it can become more to do with church promotion and new visitors. Come to our building. Our building is great. Our church, it's just like advertising. It's not really evangelizing. Okay. And as I said, public perception and response to this method are often negative. So in the final analysis, door knocking, though a traditional approach to evangelism, is becoming less effective as an evangelistic strategy and more effective as an event promotion strategy. There are exceptions. There are exceptions, and that's why I say you have to know and you have to be convinced. And if it's a good, well-constructed, well-trained team, ready to pray for people, ready to speak, knowing what they're doing, knowing how to be led by the Holy Spirit, then it may work. But also the geography is different. Door to door may work in one area and not in another. It's best to be careful, to consider, and to work based upon your consideration, not just to say, now we're all going to go door knocking. All right. So let's just move very, very swiftly in this session onto street preaching evangelism. And this is what you might call cold turkey gospel presentation. Share the gospel with others, stand at some location with pedestrian traffic, and proclaim the gospel to passers-by in various ways. Microphone, just shouting out, some kind of big prop, some sort of thing, part of, like, say, busking, and you're using that busking type of context to promote the gospel. Well, it's effective at getting attention. The gospel can be clearly articulated. It does lead to opportunities for one-on-one evangelism. It's low cost, and it is not audience dependent. On the downside, you have a limited captive audience. Most people will ignore the speaker, and apologetics are often necessary. You have to be able to answer questions, as they say, out of left field. You are not able to just have your agenda and to run with it. You're going to be asked questions about things that you're not ready for. So apologetics is often necessary. It requires thick-skinned practitioners. It evokes hostility to the point of violence. It evokes response. And another weakness is that the public perception response is often very low. So this is just common experience, and your experience up to date might be different from this, but here we go. That's how it's perceived. In the final analysis, this method is not for everybody, and its effectiveness is limited, though its secondary impact, tertiary impact, is potentially greater than any other form. It's recommended that you really know your Bible, that you really know how to answer questions, and You remember Paul saying, always be ready to give a reason, always be ready to give a reason for the faith that's within you. And you should be able to articulate clearly. I believe that street preaching has a great deal to do, but it must be practiced. You have to practice what you preach. It has to be practiced. The methodology has to be really, you have to be trained and to really know what you're doing. Okay. And as a part of that, tract evangelism. There's 3 ways of using a tract: to take someone through the tract, using it as a visual aid in a conversation, sharing the gospel in a different way, in any way, and then reaching into your pocket and giving a tract out for further consideration, or just sticking them through doors, leaving a tract for someone without a personal conversation. This is one of the simplest and most versatile methods of personal evangelism. And it's ideal for situations where a conversation is not feasible. Like if you just had a meal, you just had a few bits of conversation with the waitress, and you would say, oh, thank you, I've left you a tip on the table, God bless, and you put a tract with it. And you're not trying to catch it, you're just trying to share something that you think is the most valuable thing in the world. Just self-evaluate all the time. And so a tract with that, I don't think that's like a terrible thing to do, okay? Because there are a wide variety of tracts available and they don't need to be old-fashioned and Gothic writing, King James version. There's lots of different styles of tract for any kind of style of gospel presentation, and they can be conversation starters or conversation continuance. It's like giving somebody a business card in a way. No, I'm happy to talk to you. I know you're busy now, but no, phone us up, drop us a line, email something. That's my Facebook link right there at the bottom of the tract. Okay, and many of them appeal to visual based audiences. On the weakness side, they can be substitutes or tools to avoid personally witnessing to others. They have to kind of go alongside it, not over here, And you have to print them or buy them, so there's some expense there. And some of the ones that you buy, you have to think about it. Don't just buy a whole bunch of tracts, but some of them are poor quality and irrelevant and old-fashioned. So consider what you're putting your money or the church's money into before you purchase. In the final analysis, when it comes to personal evangelism, tracts can be really, really useful. And their best use is that of a visual aid, something that stimulates the reader to go on from that to the Bible. And some of us aren't quite sure to explain the gospel, and the tract can address that uncertainty, and it can just explicate things. It can, just opens it out before you. Okay, something like in the old days, they used to say the 4 spiritual laws. Hear that? Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. It's just it's oversimplified, but it's something. It helps me just journey into life. It helps me to put my story into perspective. Okay. When using tracts as a guide, it's best not to read the tract, but to summarize the message. This requires, again, the evangelist to do his homework, to be ready, and to be ready to share, to know what he's talking about, and to be trained, or to at least have read through what he's. Never give out a tract that you haven't read through completely yourself 10 times, and you know it backwards, and then you can use it with that greater level of experience. Okay, and there's a list here. I can send this on in the resource pack, where to get tracts from. Now, we'll just look at conversational evangelism, or relational evangelism, because this is much closer to what we find in the New Testament. So you might distinguish between conversational and relational. It's in one sense, it is starting a conversation for the purpose of sharing the gospel. And relational is looking to relate to a person, looking for permission, looking for an open door to discuss spiritual matters. So there might be a technical difference, but generally speaking, you are seeking to proclaim Christ through a normal conversation. And so we'll look at them together. And as we've seen, conversational evangelism is the one method used most by Jesus. It finds normal conversations and finds a hook, a moment, a door to share the gospel with someone else. Anywhere, anytime, any place, whatever can be said. And the strength of this is personal evangelism. It can occur anywhere at any time with any person. You can adapt a variety of tools with it that attracts the Bible. Yeah, you bring out the Bible. Be cautious of that, because it can look a bit alarming. You know, you're just speaking to someone, then all of a sudden you go, well, the Bible says, and it's got this big oppressive moan. What is this big black thing coming up at me? And then it doesn't require schedules. It requires willingness, and it can be done by anyone, and it is biblical, and it involves going out and sharing. So you sort of say, what on earth can be wrong with this? This is it, right? This is surely it. But there are some weaknesses to consider. It can be intimidating to some. So you have to be ready to just offer an opportunity and be ready to step back. Think of my wife is a experienced evangelist, and she will just offer in conversation a hint, a moment, like say, well, I prayed, before she's even mentioned about being a Christian or anything, and then she governs what happens next by the response to the first thing that's said. And if somebody pulls back, then she'll just pull back very, very gently. So she goes at the person's pace and not her own pace. Doesn't drive the conversation. She responds and listens to the person and the person's need, not to her own personal agenda. Okay, and it can be misunderstood. Some think it requires special training or special gifts. So I speak about my wife that way. But it can be adapted to everybody. Everybody uses not gifts, but their own personality, because everybody communicates with other people, but they do it in different ways, and you find what's most comfortable with you. In the final analysis, this is the method that is most highly recommended. And there's a plethora of ways to engage in conversational evangelism. But here's the point. You have to decide to live your life intentionally. And there's the kind of balance between driving an agenda and being ready, being ready. And you just keep those things in balance. You do have things to say, but you are not going to shove them into the conversation like sort of insisting, because it's just boring to somebody, isn't it? If imagine if you were just having a chat with somebody that you didn't know very well, and they kept on talking about, I don't know, say politics, and you said, yeah, and you think, oh no, that just any second now, as soon as I say a hook word, they're just going to get this barrage of political conversation. I just don't think I can stand it. You know, so if you just were waiting there with eagerly waiting to pounce in, you become a really boring conversational participant. But everybody loves a story. And if you can keep your story fresh, your personal testimony, if you can keep your story alive and up to date, it's not something ponderous that happened over there in a faraway galaxy, but it's something that's happening right now. If you can keep your testimony, your story about Jesus fresh and natural and relevant, then this is the most obvious, the most biblical, and the most ready to hand technique that we need to learn. Okay. And although conversational evangelism is probably the least common method of evangelism as such, it's undoubtedly the most effective. It's simply sharing Jesus with someone in everyday normal conversation. Okay, let's leave it at that for now, and I will see you in the next session.